The auction hall on Station Helix 9 was full of noise and strange smells. Thousands of aliens from hundreds of different species pushed against each other, trying to get closer to the stage. They were all here for the same reason. They wanted to buy rare technology, old weapons, and forgotten treasures from across the galaxy. Park Do-hyun stood at the back of the crowd. He was a human, which meant he was shorter than most of the aliens around him. He could barely see the stage over the heads of the tall insect-like creatures in front of him. But he didn't mind. He wasn't here to buy anything expensive. He only had 47 credits in his pocket. That was enough to buy food for maybe 2 weeks. Nothing more. Do-hyun was a salvager. He collected broken ships and old parts and sold them for small amounts of money. It was not a good life, but it was the only life he knew. He had been doing this for 15 years, ever since he left the dying colony where he grew up. Humans were not important in this galaxy. They were refugees, workers, and sometimes slaves. Nobody respected them. Nobody feared them. The auctioneer was a fat creature with 6 arms and skin like wet leather. He spoke in the common galactic language, his voice loud and excited. He was selling a collection of energy crystals from some dead civilization. The aliens bid against each other, pushing the price higher and higher. Do-hyun watched without interest. He could never afford such things. Hours passed. Do-hyun's legs hurt from standing, but he stayed. Sometimes the auction had cheap items at the end. Broken things that nobody wanted. Those were the things he could afford. Finally, the auctioneer brought out the last item of the day. A picture appeared on the big screen behind him. It showed a spaceship. But this was not like the smooth, beautiful ships that aliens built. This ship was ugly. It was covered in thick metal plates. It had no curves, only sharp angles and flat surfaces. Scars and burn marks covered its hull. It looked like something that had survived a war. The auctioneer made a sound of disgust. He read from his screen in a bored voice. The ship was listed as a human relic. Origin unknown. Age unknown. It had been found drifting in deep space by a salvage team. They had tried to sell it for years, but nobody wanted it. Do-hyun leaned forward, suddenly interested. The auctioneer explained the problems with the ship. Its systems were not compatible with alien neural interfaces. Aliens controlled their ships with their minds, connecting directly to the computer. But this ship had no such system. It had physical controls, buttons, levers, screens with words on them. This was considered primitive and useless. The ship's armor was also strange. It was thick and heavy, made of metal and ceramic plates. Modern ships used energy shields that weighed nothing. This ship's armor made it slow and difficult to move. The aliens in the crowd laughed. Who would want such a thing? The auctioneer started the bidding at 1,000 credits. Nobody raised their hand. He lowered it to 500. Still nothing. 200. 100. 50. The crowd was silent. Some aliens were already leaving. They had no interest in human garbage. The auctioneer sighed with all 6 of his arms. He lowered the price to 10 credits. 10 credits just to get rid of this useless piece of metal. Do-hyun raised his hand. The aliens around him turned to look. Some of them laughed. Others just stared at him with confusion. A human buying human trash. How fitting. The auctioneer didn't even congratulate him. He just pointed to a door at the side of the hall and told Do-hyun to collect his purchase from Docking Bay 47. Then he announced that the auction was over. Do-hyun walked through the station's long corridors. His heart was beating fast, though he didn't know why. It was just an old ship. Probably broken. Probably worthless. But something felt different about this. Something felt important. Docking Bay 47 was at the far end of the station, in a section that smelled like oil and rust. The door opened with a loud sound, and Do-hyun stepped inside. The ship was bigger than it looked in the picture. It filled most of the docking bay, its dark metal body blocking out the lights. Up close, Dao-Yun could see the details of its armor. Each plate was as thick as his arm. The burn marks he had seen were from weapons fire, but the armor had held. Whatever had attacked this ship had failed to destroy it. He walked around the vessel slowly, running his hand along its surface. The metal was cold and rough. He found a door on the side, a simple hatch with a manual handle. He pulled it, and it opened with a hiss of old air. Inside, the ship was dark. Dao-Yun took out a small light and shined it around. He saw corridors with metal walls, old pipes running along the ceiling, and doors with handles instead of sensors. Everything was built for human hands, human bodies, human eyes. He found the bridge at the front of the ship. There were 5 chairs, each one facing a console full of buttons and switches. A large window looked out at the docking bay. In the center of the room was a captain's chair, worn and old but still solid. Dao-Yun sat down in it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then he noticed a small panel on the armrest. It had a glass surface, like a scanner. Without thinking, he placed his hand on it. The ship came alive, dot lights turned on throughout the bridge. Screens flickered and glowed. A deep humming sound filled the air as power systems activated for the first time in centuries. Dao-Yun gripped the armrests, his eyes wide. A voice spoke. It was artificial, a computer, but it spoke in Korean. Old Korean, the kind his grandmother used to speak before she died. The voice said one word, a name, and that name appeared on every screen around him. Bulwark. The ship's computer began to talk. It explained that this vessel was a military warship from Earth. It was built 300 years ago during something called the Great Retreat. Humanity had been losing a war against the Dominion Alliance. They were being exterminated. In desperation, they built ships like this one. Ships designed not for elegance or speed, but for survival. Ships that could take punishment and keep fighting. The Bulwark had been lost in battle. Its crew killed, drifting alone in space for 3 centuries. It had been waiting for a human to wake it up. Dao-Yun sat in silence, trying to understand what he was hearing. He had bought this ship for 10 credits. 10 credits for a legend. 10 credits for a weapon from humanity's darkest hour. He looked at the screens around him, at the old controls waiting for his commands, at the thick armor that had protected this ship for hundreds of years. He wasn't a salvager anymore. He was a captain. The Bulwark was powerful, but it was also broken. The ship's computer told Dao-Yun that most systems were offline. Weapons worked at 30%. Engines worked at 20%. Life support was barely functional. The ship needed repairs, and Dao-Yun was not skilled enough to do them alone. He needed a crew. For 2 weeks, Dao-Yun traveled between stations and colonies, looking for the right people. He couldn't pay much. He couldn't promise safety. All he could offer was a chance to be part of something bigger. Most people refused. Some laughed at him. But slowly, one by one, he found them. The first was Kim Yuna. Dao-Yun found her on a mining colony called Dust 7. It was a terrible place, full of smoke and noise and tired workers. Yuna worked in a repair shop, fixing cargo haulers for a boss who paid her almost nothing. She was the best mechanic on the colony, but nobody cared. She was human. Humans were cheap labor. Dao-Yun walked into her shop and asked if she wanted to see something amazing. Yuna looked at him like he was crazy. Strangers didn't come to Dust 7 to show people amazing things. They came to take what little the workers had. But something in Dao-Yun's eyes made her curious. She followed him to the docking bay where the Bulwark was waiting. When Yuna stepped inside the engineering bay, she stopped breathing. The technology around her was old, but it was beautiful. Every system had 3 backups. Every important part could be reached by hand. There were no digital networks that could be hacked, no complex computers that could fail. This ship was built to survive anything. Yuna touched the engine core with shaking hands. She had studied old Earth engineering as a hobby, reading old books that nobody else cared about. She had dreamed of working on machines like this. She never thought she would actually see one. She looked at Dayan and said one word, "Yes, Dada." The second crew member was Li Yi-Huan. Ji-Wan was a trader who worked in the gray areas of the law. He bought things that were hard to find and sold them to people who didn't ask questions. He had connections on 12 different stations. He knew which officials could be bribed and which ones couldn't. He was useful, and he knew it. Do-Yoon had saved Ji-Wan's life 5 years ago. A deal had gone wrong, and some angry aliens had tried to kill Ji-Wan in an alley. Do-Yoon happened to be walking past. He didn't know Ji-Wan. He didn't have a reason to help. But he did anyway, fighting off the attackers with nothing but a metal pipe. Ji-Wan had owed him ever since. When Do-Yoon showed him the bulwark, Ji-Wan understood immediately. This ship could change everything. With a vessel like this, they could go places that were too dangerous for normal ships. They could take jobs that nobody else could take. They could become rich and powerful. But more importantly, they could become free. Humans in this galaxy were always under someone else's control. With a warship, they would answer to nobody. Ji-Wan didn't just agree to join. He cleared the debt himself. He said that being part of this was worth more than anything. Do-Yoon owed him. The third member was Choi Yoonji. Finding her was not easy. She was in a detention center on Station Krath, arrested for flying an unlicensed shuttle through a military blockade. The officials wanted to execute her. Flying through a blockade was a serious crime, but Do-Yoon learned why she had done it. A human colony on the other side of the blockade was dying from a disease. They needed medicine. The aliens controlling the blockade didn't care. They said the humans could die. It would save them the trouble of feeding them. Yoonji had stolen a shuttle and flown through anyway. She delivered the medicine. She saved 2,000 lives. Then she was caught. Do-Yoon used most of his remaining credits to bribe the right people. It took 3 days, but finally, Yoonji walked out of the detention center, confused and suspicious. He brought her to the bulwark and showed her the pilot's seat. The controls were manual, with physical sticks and pedals. Modern pilots used neural interfaces that connected their brains directly to the ship. Yoonji had never used such systems well. Her brain didn't work that way. She had always been a worse pilot than aliens because of this. But these controls were different. They were made for human hands and human reflexes. Yoonji sat down and grabbed the flight stick. It felt natural. It felt right. She looked at Do-Yoon with tears in her eyes. For the first time in her life, she had a ship that was built for someone like her. The last member was Han Si-woo. He was young, barely 20 years old. Do-Yoon found him on a refugee station, living in a small room with 12 other people. Si-woo had survived the destruction of his home station 3 years ago. The Dominion remnants had decided that the station had too many humans. They called it a cleansing. Si-woo escaped by hacking into the station's emergency systems and launching himself in an escape pod. He watched through the pod's window as his family, his friends, and everyone he knew died in fire. Since then, he had lived for one purpose: revenge. He spent every moment learning how to break into alien computer systems. He studied their networks, their security, their weaknesses. He became one of the best hackers in the sector, though nobody knew his name. When Do-Yoon explained what the bulwark was and what he planned to do with it, Si-woo didn't hesitate. He asked only one question: would they fight the Dominion? Do-Yoon said yes. Si-woo joined immediately. With the crew complete, work began on the ship. Yuna spent 18 hours a day in the engineering bay, bringing systems back online. She talked to the bulwark's computer constantly, learning its secrets. The ship seemed to respond to her, like it was happy to finally have someone who understood it. Jiwan used his contacts to find the parts and supplies they needed. Some he bought legally. Most he didn't. He was careful, always covering their tracks, making sure nobody knew what they were building. Yoonji practiced flying the ship every day, even when it could barely move. She learned its weight, its momentum, its limits. The bulwark was heavy and slow compared to alien ships, but Yoonji discovered that this was actually an advantage. The ship couldn't turn fast, but nothing could stop it once it started moving. Suwoo connected to the ship's old databases and began decrypting files that hadn't been opened in 300 years. He found battle records, tactical data, and technical manuals. He also found something else. Messages from the original crew. Letters to families they would never see again. Final words from people who knew they were going to die. Siwoo read every single one. He didn't cry. He had no tears left. But he made a silent promise to those dead humans. Their ship would fight again. Their sacrifice would not be forgotten. 1 month after Do-yoon bought the bulwark for 10 credits, the ship was ready. It wasn't perfect. Many systems still needed work. But it could fly. It could fight. 5 humans stood on the bridge, looking at the stars through the main window. They were not soldiers. They were not heroes. They were just people who had been pushed down their entire lives. But now they had a warship. And the galaxy was about to learn what that meant. The distress signal came at midnight, ship time. Siwoo was the first to hear it. He had been monitoring communication channels, like he always did, listening for useful information. Most of what he heard was boring. Trade reports, weather warnings, political arguments between alien factions. But this signal was different. It was human. The voice belonged to a woman. She was scared. She spoke fast, her words broken by static and fear. Her ship was a freighter called the Dawn's Hope. They were carrying food and supplies to a human colony. 3 Vrix raider ships had found them. They were being boarded. Everyone knew about the Vrix. They were tall creatures with gray skin and 4 arms. They lived by taking from others. They stole ships, cargo, and people. When they took humans, those humans were never seen again. Some said the Vrix sold them as slaves. Others said worse things. Siwoo played the signal for the rest of the crew. They gathered on the bridge, listening to the woman beg for help. She knew nobody would come. Humans didn't have warships. Humans couldn't fight back. She was just sending the signal because it was the only thing she could do. The signal gave coordinates. The Dawn's Hope was only 2 hours away at full speed. Do-yoon looked at his crew. He saw fear in their eyes, but he also saw something else. Anger. They were all thinking the same thing. How many times had they heard signals like this? How many times had they done nothing because they couldn't do anything? But now they had the bulwark. Yoonji was the first to speak. She said they should go. It might be a trap. It might be suicide. But they should go anyway. If they had this ship and did nothing while humans died, what was the point of having it? Ji-won disagreed. He said they weren't ready. The bulwark was still damaged. Its weapons were at 50%. Its engines were slow. Fighting 3 Vrix raiders was madness. Yuna said nothing. She just walked to her station in the engineering bay and started preparing the ship for combat. Siwoo looked at Do-yoon. The young man's hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. He said he didn't care about the risk. He had watched his family die because nobody came to help. He wouldn't let that happen to someone else. Do-hyun made his decision. He ordered Yoonji to set a course for the Dawn's Hope. Maximum speed. The bulwark moved through space like a bullet. It was not a graceful ship. It didn't glide or dance like alien vessels. It pushed forward with brute force. its engines burning hot. Inside, the crew prepared for battle. Yuna checked every weapon system 3 times. The bulwark had guns that fired physical projectiles, not energy beams. These projectiles were heavy pieces of metal moving at incredible speeds. Simple but deadly. Yuna made sure every gun was loaded and ready. Siwoo hacked into the Vrik's communication frequencies. He wanted to know what they were saying. He wanted to blind them when the time came. Yoonji flew with her eyes fixed on the stars. She had never flown into battle before. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it. But her hands were steady on the controls. Do-hyun stood in the center of the bridge, watching everything. He asked the ship's computer for tactical information about the Vriks. The computer responded with data from 300 years ago. Old data, but useful. The Vriks fought the same way they always had. They used fast ships with powerful energy weapons. They relied on shields to protect them. They attacked from a distance. The bulwark was designed to fight enemies like this. When they arrived at the coordinates, they found the Dawn's Hope floating dead in space. The freighter's engines were destroyed. Its hull had been cut open in several places. The 3 Vrik ships surrounded it like predators around prey. One of the Vrik ships scanned the bulwark as it approached. The aliens must have been confused. This ship looked human, but humans didn't have warships. It was probably just another freighter come to share the same fate. They were wrong. Do-hyun gave the order to attack. Eung pushed the engines to full power. The bulwark accelerated toward the closest Vrik ship. The aliens finally realized something was wrong. They turned their weapons and fired. Energy beams hit the bulwark's armor. They were designed to overload shields, to disrupt energy systems, to kill with electricity and heat. But the bulwark had no shields to overload. It had only metal. Thick, heavy, stupid metal that absorbed the energy and turned it into nothing. The Vriks fired again and again. The bulwark kept coming. Inside the ship, the crew felt the impacts. The lights flickered. The walls shook. But nothing broke. Nothing failed. The ship was taking hits that would have destroyed any modern vessel. And it was still flying. Yoonji brought them close to the first Vrik ship. At this range, she could see the alien pilot through their window. He looked terrified. Yuna fired the main guns. The sound was deafening. Physical projectiles shot through space at thousands of meters per second. They hit the Vrik ship's shields and passed through like the shields weren't there. Energy shields were designed to stop energy weapons. They couldn't stop solid metal. The Vrik ship exploded. The other 2 raiders tried to run. They turned and fired their engines, trying to escape. But Yoonji was faster than they expected. She had studied the bulwark's movement for weeks. She knew exactly how to use its weight and momentum. She swung the ship around in a wide arc, using its mass like a hammer. The second Vrik ship tried to dodge. Yoonji predicted its path and cut it off. Yuna fired again. Another explosion. The last ship was almost out of range. Siwoo disabled its communications so it couldn't call for help. Then he found something else in their systems. Information. Coordinates for Vrik spaces. Names of slaves they had taken. Records of deals they had made. He downloaded everything. Yoonji caught up to the final ship. The Vriks were sending surrender signals, begging for mercy. Do-hyun thought about accepting. These creatures had taken countless humans. They had caused so much suffering. But killing them after they surrendered felt wrong. Then Yuna's voice came over the speakers. She had scanned the Dawn's Hope. There were survivors on board. 37 humans still alive. But there were also Vrik boarding parties inside the freighter. They were killing the humans one by one. Do-hyun's mercy disappeared. He ordered Yuna to destroy the last ship. She did that after that. Yoonji brought the bulwark alongside the Dawn's Hope. Do-hyun and Ji-won took weapons and went aboard the freighter. They found the Vrix boarding parties in the cargo hold, standing over the bodies of humans they had killed. The fight was short and brutal. Do-hyun had never killed before, but he didn't hesitate. He thought of his grandmother, who died on a refugee ship because nobody would help her. He thought of all the humans who had suffered while the galaxy looked away. When it was over, 37 humans were saved. They looked at Do-hyun like he was a miracle. They asked who he was. Where did this ship come from? How was this possible? Do-hyun didn't know how to answer. He just told them they were safe now. The crew brought the survivors aboard the Bulwark. Yuna treated their injuries. Ji-won found them food and blankets. Siwoo showed the children the bridge, letting them sit in the pilot's seat. Word spread fast. The survivors talked. They sent messages to friends and family. They told everyone about the human warship that came out of nowhere and destroyed 3 Vrix raiders in minutes. Most people didn't believe them. Humans didn't have warships. It was impossible. But some people believed. Some people started asking questions. And far across the galaxy, in places where humanity's enemies made their plans, powerful beings began to hear whispers about a ship called the Bulwark. The 5 humans on the bridge didn't know it yet, but they had just started a war. And this time, humanity would not lose. 6 months passed after the battle with the Vrix. In that time, the Bulwark became famous among humans and feared among aliens. Do-hyun and his crew attacked slavers, freed prisoners, and destroyed anyone who hunted humans. They never looked for fights, but they never ran from them either. Each victory brought more attention and more enemies. The Dominion Alliance had ruled this part of the galaxy for 500 years. They were a coalition of 12 powerful species who had decided long ago that they would control everything. 300 years ago, they had tried to exterminate humanity. They had almost succeeded. Only scattered refugees survived, living as servants and slaves in the Dominion's shadow. The Dominion believed the human threat was over. Humans were broken. Humans were harmless. Humans would never rise again. High Commander Desik received the first reports about the Bulwark while eating his morning meal. He was an old creature, his scales turning gray with age, his 4 eyes clouded with time. But his mind was still sharp. He had lived through the war with humans. He remembered what they were capable of. The report said a human warship had destroyed a Vrix raiding party. Desik ignored them. The Vrix were weak. Anyone could destroy them. More reports came. The human ship attacked a slave transport and freed 200 prisoners. It destroyed a Dominion patrol that tried to stop it. It raided a weapons depot and stole enough ammunition to fight for years. Desik's officers laughed at these reports. Human propaganda, they said. Lies and exaggeration. Humans didn't have warships. All their ships were destroyed in the war. But Desik didn't laugh. He remembered the war too well. He remembered the first time he faced a human ship in battle. It was ugly, covered in metal plates, nothing like the elegant vessels of the Dominion. His weapons hit it again and again, but it kept coming. Energy beams that should have torn it apart simply scorched its armor. Missiles that should have destroyed it exploded harmlessly. Against layers of metal dot, the human ship closed the distance and opened fire with simple projectile weapons. Desik's shields, designed to stop energy attacks, couldn't stop solid metal moving at high speed. Half his fleet was destroyed in minutes. Desik survived only because reinforcements arrived. It took 50 Dominion ships to destroy that one human vessel. 50 ships against one. That memory had stayed with him for 300 years. Now, listening to reports about a ship called the Bulwark, he felt the old fear returning. He sent a patrol fleet to investigate. 12 ships, all modern, all powerful. They found the Bulwark near a human colony and attacked. None of them returned. Now the Dominion could not ignore the threat. Desic called a war council. For the first time in centuries, the 12 species of the Dominion discussed humanity as an enemy instead of as slaves. They declared the bulwark a priority target. They offered a bounty so large it could buy an entire planet. Mercenaries, bounty hunters, and ambitious commanders all began searching for Do-Yun and his crew. On the bulwark, the crew knew they were being hunted. Siwoo monitored enemy communications constantly. He heard them talking about the bounty. He heard them planning ambush. He heard them arguing about how to destroy a ship that seemed impossible to kill. Do-Hyun gathered his crew and told them the truth. The Dominion was coming for them. They could run. They could hide in the empty spaces between stars where nobody would find them. They could live quietly and safely for the rest of their lives, or they could fight. Nobody chose to run. Yuna had been studying the bulwark's databases for months. She had found something incredible. The ship's computer contained records from the old war, information that had been lost for 300 years. Battle strategies, weapon designs, ship locations. During the Great Retreat, when humanity was losing the war, they had built hundreds of warships like the bulwark. They knew they couldn't win. They knew they would probably die. But they refused to let their enemy have complete victory. Before the end, they hid ships across the galaxy. Secret locations, hidden coordinates, places where vessels waited in cold storage, ready to wake up when human hands touched their controls again. The bulwark had the coordinates for 12 of these locations. Do-Hyun stared at the screen, unable to speak. 12 ships. 12 warships like the bulwark, sleeping in the darkness, waiting for someone to find them. But finding the ships was only part of the problem. Ships needed crews. Pilots like Yoonji, engineers like Yuna, people willing to fight and possibly die. Jiwon had an idea. For months, he had been building a network of contacts among human refugees, workers on mining colonies, servants in alien households, prisoners in labor camps, scattered people who had nothing except their anger and their dreams. He could reach them. He could send a message. A simple message asking one question: do you want to fight? They started sending the message. It spread slowly at first, then faster. Human to human, whisper to whisper, through channels that aliens didn't know existed. The message reached mining colonies and refugee stations. It reached slave ships and prison camps. It reached every corner of the galaxy where humans survived. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of humans wanted to join. They were tired of being victims. They were tired of watching their families die while the galaxy did nothing. They wanted revenge. They wanted freedom. They wanted to matter. Do-Hyun couldn't take them all. The bulwark was only one ship. But Jiwon organized the willing humans into groups. He assigned them to different locations. When the time came, they would be ready. Meanwhile, Siwoo discovered something else in the Dominion communications. High Commander Desic himself was coming. He was bringing a battle group of 40 warships. He intended to find the bulwark and destroy it personally. Desic was the only Dominion commander who truly understood the threat. He was the only one who had fought humans before. He knew that if the bulwark escaped, if it found other ships, if it built a fleet, the Dominion would face a war they might not win. He was right. Do-Hyun looked at the tactical display, showing Desic's fleet. 40 ships against one. Impossible odds, but the crew of the bulwark had stopped believing in impossible. They had started as a salvager, a mechanic, a trader, a pilot, and a hacker. Now they were warriors. They had fought and won against enemies who should have destroyed them. They would fight again. Do-Hyun set a course for the Varus Nebula. That was where the nearest cache of hidden ships waited. If Desic wanted to stop the human resurgence, he would have to follow them there. The final battle was coming. And this time, humanity would not stand alone. The bulwark's engines powered up. The ship that nobody wanted, bought for 10 credits at a forgotten auction, carried the hope of an entire species into the darkness between stars. Behind them, the scattered humans of the galaxy prepared for war. Ahead of them, an ancient enemy gathered its forces. The universe was about to remember why it had once feared humanity. The Varus Nebula was a cloud of gas and dust that stretched across billions of kilometers. Ships could hide inside it for years without being found. Sensors didn't work well in the nebula. Communication was difficult. It was the perfect place for secrets. Deep inside this cloud, 7 ancient warships waited in darkness. They had floated there for 300 years, their systems frozen, their weapons cold. They looked like graves. They looked like death, but they were not dead. They were sleeping. Duhayan stood on the bridge of the bulwark, watching the first of the sleeping ships appear on his screen. It was called the Defiance. It was bigger than the bulwark, with more armor and more guns. Ice covered its hull. No lights showed through its windows. Eung flew them close, and Doyun sent the activation signal. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, lights began to appear. The Defiance was waking up. Over the next 3 days, they activated all 7 ships. Each one responded to human commands. Each one came back to life after centuries of sleep. Yuna worked constantly, moving between ships, checking systems, making repairs. She barely slept. Meanwhile, humans arrived to crew the vessels. Jiwan had organized everything. Small transport ships carried refugees and workers from across the sector. They came knowing they might die. They came anyway. Doyun met each crew personally. He saw miners with rough hands and tired eyes. He saw servants who had spent their lives bowing to aliens. He saw prisoners with scars on their bodies and hatred in their hearts. He saw young people who had never known a galaxy where humans were free, and old people who remembered stories of Earth before the war. They were not soldiers. Most of them had never held a weapon. But they learned fast. The ships taught them, their computers guiding new crews through training simulations based on data from the old war. By the end of the week, 8 human warships floated in the nebula. The Bulwark, the Defiance, the Indomitable, the Last Stand, the Unyielding, the Iron Heart, the Resolute, and the newest arrival, a smaller but fast ship called the Fury. 8 ships against 40. Still terrible odds. But better than 1 against 40. Then Siwu detected incoming signals. High Commander Thesek had arrived. The Dominion fleet entered the nebula in perfect formation. 40 warships, each one larger than the Bulwark, each one carrying weapons that could crack planets. Thesek commanded from his flagship, a massive vessel called the Eternal Victory. He was confident but careful. He had fought humans before. He knew they didn't surrender. He knew they didn't run. He expected a trap, but even Thesek didn't expect what he found. His sensors detected the Bulwark first, floating alone near a cloud of dust. Thesek smiled. 1 ship against 40. Even humans couldn't survive those odds. He ordered his fleet to surround the target. His ships spread out, forming a circle of death around the Bulwark. There would be no escape. Then the other signals appeared. 7 more human warships emerged from the nebula's clouds. They came from different directions, their engines burning bright, their weapons charging. They looked like ghosts. They looked like nightmares from 300 years ago. Thesek's smile disappeared. The battle began with fire. The Dominion ships attacked with energy weapons that lit up the nebula like lightning. Blue and green beams cut through the darkness, striking the human fleet. Any normal ships would have been destroyed in seconds, but these were not normal ships. the human vessels pushed forward through the storm of energy. Their armor absorbed hit after hit. They didn't stop. They didn't slow down. They came like a wall of metal, closing the distance between themselves and the enemy. On the bridge of the bulwark, Do-hyun commanded the fleet. He had studied the tactics from the old war. He knew how humans had fought against impossible odds. They didn't try to be clever. They didn't dance around the enemy. They went straight at them and trusted their armor to hold. Yoonji flew like she had never flown before. The bulwark moved through explosions and weapons fire, dodging when it could, taking hits when it couldn't. She felt the ship around her like an extension of her own body. Yuna kept everything running. When systems failed, she fixed them. When armor was damaged, she rerouted power. She shouted orders to her engineering crew and somehow kept the ship fighting. Siwoo attacked the enemy's communications. He sent false signals that confused their coordination. He shut down weapon systems on 3 Dominion ships by hacking their networks. He was everywhere at once, a ghost in the machine. Ji-won coordinated supplies and damage reports between all 8 human ships. He kept track of ammunition, of injured crew members, of which ships needed help. His voice was calm even when explosions shook the bridge. The Dominion fought back hard. They destroyed the last stand with concentrated fire from 6 ships. They crippled the Iron Heart, forcing its crew to abandon ship. They damaged every human vessel, but the humans kept fighting. The Defiance rammed a Dominion cruiser, crushing it with pure mass before pulling away. The Indomitable destroyed 4 enemy ships with close-range fire that couldn't miss. The Resolute protected wounded vessels, using its own body as a shield. Slowly, impossibly, the battle turned. The Dominion had never faced enemies like this. Their weapons were designed for modern warfare, for shields and energy systems and computers. Human ships had none of those things. They had only armor and guns and crews that refused to die. Desik watched his fleet dying around him. 20 ships gone, then 25, then 30. The human vessels were damaged and burning, but they were still fighting. He ordered a retreat. His remaining ships turned to run, but Do-hyun wasn't finished. The bulwark chased the eternal victory. Yoonji pushed the engines beyond their limits. Alarms screamed warnings, but she ignored them. They were too close to stop now. Yuna fired everything they had. Projectiles tore through the flagship shields and armor. The eternal victory shuddered and slowed, its engines failing. Do-hyun led a boarding party. He took Ji-won and 20 volunteers through the damaged hull, fighting through corridors filled with smoke and dying aliens. They killed anyone who resisted. They ignored anyone who surrendered. They found Desik on his bridge, surrounded by dead officers. The old commander was injured, his blood staining the floor beneath him. But he was still alive. He looked at Do-hyun with his 4 clouded eyes. He asked the question that had haunted him for 300 years. Why? Why did humans keep fighting when they had already lost? Why did they refuse to accept defeat? Why couldn't they just stay down? Do-hyun looked at the alien who had helped destroy his ancestors. He thought about his grandmother, who had died as a refugee. He thought about Siwoo's family, killed in a cleansing. He thought about all the humans who had suffered and died while the galaxy treated them like animals. His answer was simple. Because we're human. We don't stay down. We never stop fighting. And today, we remembered who we are. Desik closed his eyes and died. The battle was over. The Dominion fleet was destroyed. Desik was dead. 5 human warships survived, damaged but victorious. Across the galaxy, the news spread faster than light. Humans had defeated the Dominion in open battle. Humans had warships again. Humans were rising. On colonies and stations and refugee ships, humans looked at each other with new eyes. They had spent generations believing they were nothing. Now they knew the truth. On the bridge of the bulwark, the crew stood together. They were exhausted and injured and covered in blood. But they were alive. And they had won. Dong looked at his friends. Yuna, who had kept them flying. Yoonji, who had flown them through hell. Jiwon, who had built their army from nothing. Suwoo, who had turned their enemies' own systems against them. They had started with nothing. A broken salvager. A forgotten mechanic. A criminal trader. Imprisoned pilot. An orphan hacker. Now they were legends. The ship's computer spoke, playing a message recorded 300 years ago. It was the voice of the Bulwark's original captain. A woman who had known she was going to die, but had hidden her ship anyway, hoping that someday it would fight again. Her words filled the bridge. We were never defeated. We were waiting, and now our children have found us. Make us proud. Show them what humanity can do. Daeyoung looked out at the stars. The war wasn't over. The Dominion was still powerful. More battles would come, but for the first time in 300 years, humanity had hope. They had ships. They had crews. They had the will to fight, and it all started with one man who bought a ship nobody wanted for 10 credits at a galactic auction. The universe would never forget what came next.